And we are in the middle of the third category of bad people. We had the minim, and we had the apikorsim, and then we have category number 3, which are called Cofare Bachelor. They believe in God, etc., but they deny the Torah. And the Rambam says there are 3 categories of those who are called Cofare Bachelor. We had talked about the first category, so let's just go over the 3 categories. The first is Aint Torah Me Hashem, afilu pasuk echad, afilu teva achas, im amar Moshe amrai mipi atzmo hareza Cofare B'Torah. So the Rambam says, someone who says the Torah is not from God, or even if he says one letter or one word was not dictated by Hashem, but Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it himself, that is called a Cofare B'Torah. So just, if you remember, there was a question that was raised, and that is, the Rambam, in one of the definitions of an apikoros, is someone who denies the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the question becomes, if I literally believe that Moshe Rabbeinu made up the Torah, that's an apikoros who is denying that Moshe Rabbeinu received prophecy from God. So what is the difference between Makhish Nevuaso Shel Moshe Rabbeinu, which is classified as an apikoros, and Aint Torah Me Hashem, which is classified as a Cofare B'Torah? Seems to be the same thing. Now again, I understand that in the long run it doesn't make much of a difference, because whether you're an apikoros or a Cofare B'Torah, the consequences are the same. But if for whatever reason the Rambam is very rigid and precise in creating these categories, presumably if you're an apikoros, you don't fall under the Cofare B'Torah, you fall under the apikoros category. So what would be the difference? So the teretz I suggested, just to go over this again, is that the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu is the general idea that the Jewish people have this mitzvah, that mitzvah, that mitzvah, that mitzvah. So if I believe that Moshe Rabbeinu made up the mitzvahs and they didn't come from God, that's apikoros. And apikoros is one who says, hey, I deny Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy in whole or in part. Masha'en Ken Cofare B'Torah is more specifically referring to the text of the Torah. For example, as I said, in the books of the prophets, Hashem gave them a message, but they wrote the message in their own words. The words were not dictated by Hashem. So, what if I have the same attitude towards the Torah? Yes, Moshe Rabbeinu was given the mitzvahs by God, and he was told to communicate them to us. But the particular choice of words were his choice. That is what the Rambam calls Cofare B'Torah. So, Cofare B'Torah doesn't mean, as we would normally think, I deny the authority of the Torah. I just deny the literary form of the Torah being of divine origin. It's very different, meaning, if I deny the divinity of the Torah, that's technically an apikoros. If I acknowledge the divinity of the Torah, but I simply say the particular literary form was Moshe Rabbeinu's words, that's not an apikoros. That is called Cofare B'Torah. So Cofare B'Torah means he denies the divine origin of the specific words that the Torah uses, even though he believes it comes from Hashem in terms of its commandments. And the Rambam adds that this includes not only the whole Torah, but even if you say one letter Moshe Rabbeinu added to the Torah, that if it doesn't change the meaning even, that is what is called Cofare B'Torah. Now again, as I say every class, we are looking at the Rambam Shita. Now the Rambam Shita is not necessarily going to be everybody's Shita, and we'll look at some of the other Shitos later. For example, according to Rav Yosef Albo, once again, as long as I believe the Torah is divine, I'm not wedded to the particular words that were used. That's a separate issue if the Torah as a revelation comes from God. But we're looking at the Rambam right now. So that is the first case, right? There are three cases that are called Cofare Bachelor. The first is a person who does not believe that every letter of the Torah was dictated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yeah. Now, the question you raised actually is a good question. Let me go over your question again, because upon further reflection, I didn't really answer it, and I'm not sure I have an answer according to the Rambam. And that is, we know that in the words of the Torah, there are what are called chaseros v'yaseros. Sometimes a letter is missing that should normally have been there, or sometimes a letter is extra that grammatically didn't have to be there. These are letters. An example would be, a lot of times in names you see this, Aharone. Now Aharone, although in modern Hebrew they stick a vav into everything, that's one thing you'll notice. That's called ksiv maleh, and that's because people who were illiterate in classical Hebrew needed to have those extra vowels all over the place. But Aaron in the Torah is generally spelled Aleph, Hey, Resh, Nun. Aharone. However, occasionally, and in modern Hebrew it's not spelled this way all the time, Aharone is spelled with an extra vav between the Resh and the Nun to indicate the O sound. Aharone. So the extra vav is called a maleh, and without the vav, it's a chaser. Now, that does not affect the meaning at all, whether there's a vav or not a vav. It's Aharone, and it refers to Moshe Rabbeinu's brother, the Kohen Gadol. So, the Gemara says in Maseches Kedushin that we are no longer sure about our chaseros and yaseros, that somehow the tradition got lost, and sometimes when there's a vav in Aaron, it should have not had the vav, and sometimes when there's not a vav in Aaron, it should have had the vav. We're not bucky, the Gemara says, in chaseros and yaseros, and Minchas Chinuch makes the point, which I think is pashut, that this only refers to chaseros and yaseros that do not change the meaning. Certainly, in terms of the meaning of the psukim, we do have an oral tradition, and that was not forgotten. But in terms of spelling, the spelling got lost. The Rama uses this Gemara lahalacha l'maisa, a very practical halacha, and that is, normally if you're reading the Torah and you discover a mistake in the Torah, like a word is missing, a whole word is missing, or a letter is not written in the right way, or a letter is erased. So the halacha is you got to take out a new Sefer Torah. Exactly what you do is quite complicated. I'll tell you the Ramaz Psak. The Ramaz Psak is that if you're at a point where you'd be permitted to stop the aliyah, right? Aliyahs have certain rules. You can only read you can only have an aliyah, has to be at least 3 psukim. You can't have less than 3 psukim. And it has to be 3 psukim left until the next paragraph and the like. But if you're allowed to stop, we actually tell the Ola, we'll stop the aliyah now and you make your after bracha. And then we'll take out a new Torah and call somebody else. So you actually make a bracha achrona on the puzzle sefer. If you cannot stop, we take out a new Sefer Torah and we're mamshech, and then you make the bracha. We call somebody else. But bottom line, however you manage with the bracha, in which there are many, many different opinions, the Ramah is only one opinion, and many Ashkenazic minhagim don't follow this Ramah, and they will not allow a bracha on a puzzle Sefer Torah. But the bottom line is you got to take out another Sefer Torah and finish the rest of the Kriya. An interesting thing you might think about is, we don't require you to reread what was already done. So whatever aliyahs were done before you caught the mistake, b'di'evad they're valid, but mikanu lahaba, you have to take out a new Sefer Torah, right? That's a well-known halacha. Baruch Hashem, I don't recall it happening here. I don't know why, but in shows it happens with some frequency. I guess we check our Sefer Torah ahead of time. Now, the Ramah says, what if the mistake that you catch is in chaseris and yaseris? You're not missing a word and the letter is not puzzle, but the Aaron is supposed to have a vav and it doesn't have a vav. Do we take out a new Sefer Torah because of that type of mistake? because it is a mistake vis-a-vis our Chumash. In other words, it's not the way the Chumash has it. But the Rama says, since we're not baki in Chaseris and Yeseris, we don't really know that what the Chumash is right and the Torah is wrong. Maybe the Torah is right. And since we're not a baki in it, we do not take out another Sefer Torah. This is what the Rama says, based on the idea that we're not baki in Chaseris v'Yeseris. So, in truth, this actually seems to contradict the Rambam Zikr a little bit, because essentially what that means is, when I see a Vav in Aaron, I don't know if it's from God. I don't know that. Maybe it was, the Gemara is telling me, maybe it was a result of forgetting the tradition and putting in an extra Vav. That's exactly what the Gemara means. If that's so, it's not really true to say, every single letter in our Torah scroll was dictated by God, and if I don't believe that, I don't have a Chelek in Olam Haba. Well, it's not true that we know for sure. Now, I guess you could say every single letter that Moshe wrote down was dictated by God. Yeah, okay, let's go with that. But that doesn't really help you very much, because at that point you could say, yeah, I believe that everything Moshe wrote down was from God, but I don't believe that the Torah as we have it. At that point, why can't I say, if you're going to limit the Rambam to simply meaning whatever Moshe wrote down is from God, then what would stop me from saying, I believe the whole thing got revised? Yeah, whatever Moshe wrote, which I have no idea, I believe, right? So the Rambam is not just saying whatever Moshe wrote is from God. The Rambam must be saying whatever we have is from God. Otherwise, a guy could say the whole Torah got rewritten later. So if that's the case, your question is very good, because I think I tried to get away with that answer, that what Moshe wrote was from God. But as I think about it more, I don't think the Rambam could possibly mean that. Because if that's the case, then a person could be a kaifer in everything by saying, yeah, whatever Moshe wrote is from God, but I think that Ezra changed the whole thing. Obviously the Rambam does not subscribe to that. And indeed, although he doesn't say it here, but in the Akdama de Chelek, he actually says, HaTorah HaMetsuya Biyadenu. He adds those words. The Torah as we have it, the Rambam says, is from God. So if that's the case, you have a very excellent question. How would the Rambam understand the idea that we're not baki in the chaser and the yeser? Because that actually means, by definition, there may be letters that are not from Hashem. Yeah.
So he says the Torah as we have it is from God.
Yeah, he doesn't say that here for some reason, but in the Akdama Chelek he says it. Yeah.
But there are I think like 8 differences or something like this, and most of them are like, as you said, like the vowels. And there might be one that changed the meaning. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But if he says the Torah as we have it is from God, does that mean like, well, since he's Safari, all the Ashkenazim and Kofar, they have? Yeah,
they have a different God, the Ashkenazi God and the Sephardi God. Yeah, it's just like in Svat, right? You have the Ari Ashkenazi show and the Ari Sephardi show. So what? There's an Ashkenazic Ari and a Sephardic Ari. Yeah, so that's a very good question. People like to point out that all of the Sifrei Torah that exist in the world, and all of the Sifrei Torah that we've ever discovered in history, although we don't go back that far, actually, we don't really have, we don't have Sifrei Torah from the First Temple period, for example, but we go back 2,000 years or so. All of it is 99.9% the same. So that shows that there's been no deviations. Well, that is impressive, but on the other hand, 99.9 is not 100%, meaning there is 0.1% that there are differences. Now, these differences generally do not change the meaning, an aleph, a hey, extra thing, and the like. So how do you explain that? How do you explain that? In other words, how can you say, this is another kasha besides your kasha? This is another kasha. How do differences get in there if you're supposed to believe everything is from God? So, for example, how does an Ashkenazi look at a Sephardi Sefer Torah? That their deviation, as from my perspective, is not from God, and the Sephardi looks at me and says, your deviation is not from God. So I heard something many, many years ago, I think even as a child, and I remembered it. I always remembered it, but I never had a Makar. Everyone, and I've said it over, and many people asked me for a Makar, but now, Baruch Hashem, I do have a Makar. And here is the idea. The idea is that the Torah tells us on the last day of Moshe Rabbeinu's life, he wrote, miraculously, 13 Torah scrolls. That's mamish a miracle. 13 Torah scrolls. He gave one sefer to each tribe, and then the master sefer was put in the Aron HaKodesh to be kept in the Mishkan, but each tribe was given an authenticated Sefer Torah written by Moshe Rabbeinu. By the way, Tosfos in Menachos asks a really, really good kasha. According to Chazal, Moshe died on the 7th of Adar, we know that. But according to Chazal, Moshe Rabbeinu died Shabbos afternoon. Shabbos Mincha, we say after Chazaras Hashatz, Tzidkascha Tzedek, we acknowledge the justice of God's righteousness. And the Poskim say, why do we say this? Because Shabbos Mincha, 3 great tzaddikim left the world. And we still have, even though it's Shabbos, we still have a sense of mourning over their loss. Yosef HaTzadik, Moshe Rabbeinu, and David HaMelech. That's why there are 3 psukim. Tzidkas Tzedek has 3 verses, all of which talk about acknowledging the justice of God's judgment. So Taisus and Menachos asked the kasha, how could Moshe Rabbeinu write 13 Sifrei Torah on the day that he died? The day that he died was Shabbos. And this is after Matan Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu can't write on Shabbos. So Tosfos gives an answer, an amazing answer, that since Al Korchach, this was a miraculous process. No human could write 13 Torahs in one day. So Tosfos says a chiddush, that which is effected through miracles is not considered to be a malacha on Shabbos. The Torah prohibits human activity. It does not prohibit supernatural activity. So, if any of you want to go to Hogwarts after Ohr Somayach, now there may be prohibitions of magic. That's a separate issue. We're not dealing with the prohibition of magic, but the fact that they have classes on Saturday will technically not be a problem, because Tosfos says that which is done through Kishuf or Moshe Rabbeinu's case, Derech Neis, is not called a malacha on Shabbos. That's a big chiddush. Okay, but to answer your question, so that's all Taisus says. But Yitzchak Isaac of Kamarna was a great makubal. Tain is like this. When Moshe Rabbeinu wrote a separate Sefer Torah for each Shevet, since every Shevet has its own unique approach in Avodas Hashem, Al Pi Hashem, there were small differences that were introduced in the Svarim. Now, we have no idea exactly what the significance of that was, but on a spiritual, mystical level, Reuven's Torah was different than Shimon's Torah, that was different than Yehuda's Torah. It didn't change any mitzvahs. The mitzvahs are the same. So it turns out that according to this does not answer your question, but according to this, the deviations are not accidents, and they're not mistakes, and they're not forgetting, but they represent remnants of the different shvatim having different Sifrei Torah. That's a really, really interesting answer, because otherwise you'd be forced to say there were errors, there were mistakes, things were forgotten, which we normally don't want to say, and that would be a violation of the Rambam's rule that Kala Torah Mitzuya B'Yedenu. So therefore, the Ashkenazi Torah is from Hashem, and the Sephardi Torah is from Hashem. It's all from Hashem, and for reasons that we honestly cannot fathom. We honestly do not understand this. But Al Pi Hashem, there were deviations, slight deviations, that were introduced in the different Sfarim. Yeah.
I thought that there was a case in the Tanakh where all the Sefer Torahs were lost, and they found one in the Beit HaMikdash somewhere. It was boarded up, and all of our Sefer Torahs on the floor.
Yeah. So that is not entirely clear. Let me go over that a little bit, because it's an important narrative. The Torah had, not the Torah, the Book of Malachim, Book of Kings, talks about a very righteous king, Chizkiyahu HaMelech, who was very, very righteous. And Chizkiyahu didn't want to get married because he had a premonition that he would have a son that's a Rasha. And because of that, he was going to die. And eventually he got married. The Navi Yeshayahu gave him Teichacha. But Chizkiyahu's Nevuah was correct. He had an evil son, Menashe, who was not only a sinner, but he was Machdias HaRabim. And Menashe had a son, Ammon, who was also a Rasha. No good. But somehow, after Menashe and after Ammon, a little boy became king at the age of 8, who was Yoshiyahu HaMelech. And Yoshiyahu HaMelech became a big tzaddik who tried to bring Klal Yisrael back to Tshuva. He was not totally successful. The Beis HaMikdash was destroyed around 20 years after his death. But he was like the last great chance. Yoshiyahu was a great, great tzaddik. He was killed by Paro. He was killed in a war in Megiddo. Now, in the book of Malachim, there's an amazing story that they were renovating the Beis HaMikdash, which had fallen into disrepair because during the years of Menashe and Ammon, they were doing Avodah Zarah. So the Beis HaMikdash was not destroyed, but it was not being used. So in Yoshiyahu's reign, they're renovating the Beis HaMikdash. And lo and behold, they find buried in the ground or buried in the wall a Sefer Torah. And they're enormously excited. And Yoshiyahu then starts a tshuva campaign, so people will keep the Torah. So how do you understand the narrative? How do you understand, why are they so excited? They found a Torah. I mean, why is that so exciting? So the standard understanding is kind of like you said it, and that is Menashe and Ammon, particularly Menashe. Menashe's reign was 55 years. He was the longest reign of any king in Am Yisrael. 55 years of chait, of sin, that Menashe was so successful, like Stalin, that he literally eradicated all of the Torahs in the Jewish people. The Torah would have been totally lost, forgotten, and they literally found only one Torah scroll. Now, that's one way of understanding the narrative. Now, if the narrative is understood that way, then your question is very compelling, and that would actually mean all Torah scrolls that we have today have to be descended from that one Torah scroll, because every other Torah was destroyed. And then you got a problem. So how did differences get introduced, since obviously we didn't have a later divine revelation, we're just copying the Torah? So very, very good question. But there's another way of understanding it, and Chazal didn't seem to understand the story the way many people do understand it. Chazal do not understand the story that this was the only Torah scroll. They say for sure there were Sifrei Torah. What was unique was not that they found a Torah scroll, but that it was open to a specific place. They found a Torah scroll open to certain verses. And those are the verses of the Tochacha that say, if you don't keep Hashem's mitzvos, there's going to be Golos and Chorban. And Yoshiyahu saw that as a divine warning that we better improve our ways. So this is an important point. There are two fundamental different ways of interpreting the Yoshiyahu story. One is the super dramatic thing that this was literally the only Sefer Torah in existence. The other is, no, there were Sefers. There were other Sefer Torah as well. And hence there could still be these deviations. Right? This Torah, that Torah, that Torah. But the Chiddush was not that they found a Torah. The Chiddush was the Torah was open to these critical verses. So if you learn that way, I think your kasha is not so strong. But by the way, I'll tell you another thing. Another question on the other version. If you understand the Yoshiyahu, in fact, people ask this question. If you understand the Yoshiyahu story, that this was the only Sefer Torah, then l'chora, you're undermining the famous, what Rav Gottlieb calls the Kuzari principle. Right? The Kuzari makes the argument that why do we believe that the Torah comes from God? Because this was communicated to 3 million people. In other words, in other words, when I come to you like other religions, right? God, somebody comes and says, God spoke to me, that you should listen to me and follow me. So if I'm charismatic enough, I might be able to convince you that God spoke to me, and we could build up a following. I could eventually get millions of people who put their trust in me, even though I'm a liar. But if I make a claim, God appeared to all of you, well, not everybody's going to believe that. I don't remember God appearing to me. And how do you get away with it? So any claim that God appeared to 3 million people, the question is, when and where can such a lie be introduced into the system? Unless you're talking about a mass conspiracy of 3 million people to tell their children that happened. So the Kuzari's argument is that because Judaism makes a claim of mass revelation, as opposed to revelation to a single or a small group, even a small group of people, that is a lie. Well, that is a phenomenon that, if it would be a lie, would be so preposterous that it would never be believed, and therefore it must be true. That's called the Kuzari principle. That's an adaptation of what Rav Yehuda Levi says in the Kuzari. Now here's the problem. If you assume, however, that all evidence of Judaism was lost, except for the single Torah scroll that says God appeared to 3 million people, or whatever it would be, well, at that point, it no longer becomes a historical memory, it just becomes a literary statement. So the whole Kuzari principle no longer has its validity. Masha'en Kain, if we assume the Torah was never lost, there was an unbroken chain, then you don't have that problem anymore. So there are two different interpretations of the Yoshio HaMelech story. Yeah.
I mean, how many variations are we talking about? Because if there was only one, and there's only like one or two, then if the leaders of each of these communities...
Yeah, we have a total of 8 or 9. I don't remember the exact number. And they don't change the meaning. So, but apparently there would be mystical reasons for it that we don't get. So I don't know if that means we don't even have all the variations, they got lost, or it means that some of the tribes did get the same Torah, that the variations were only for some Shvatim and not others. By the way, just to give you an analogy to this, which is a well-known analogy. This thing is less known. This thing is very much less known. This is really a chiddush of a makubal, so I can't say it's from Chazal. I mean, I can't automatically even say it's authoritative. But the person who said it was a Gavra Rabber, Yitzchak Isaac of Kamarna. So, he was a chashuv person. But we have from Rav Chaim Volozhiner that this is the explanation of different nuschaos in the Amida, in Shmona Esrei. Because people say, well, the Anshe Knesset Agdola wrote the Amida, so how could it be that different groups have different words? Did somebody get it wrong? Are there mistakes? Now, that's actually not as serious a question as differences in the Torah. All right. Differences in transmission of the Anshe Knesset Agdola does not raise the same problems, but it is a problem, meaning, how did you get these differences introduced? So Rav Chaim Volozhiner brings from the Arizal, actually I should say from the Arizal, that in the Beis HaMikdash, there were 13 gates to the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. Each shevet had its own gate, and the 13th gate was if a person didn't know his shevet in the course of time. The 13th gate was for anybody who didn't have a specific designation. So the Arizal writes, Kishem, that there are 13 gates in the Beis HaMikdash. There are 13 different ways of davening to Hashem. Each shevet had its own nusach of tefillah, which is more or less the same. I mean, nuschos are not radically different. I mean, Shmona Esreis, Amidas across the board, are not totally different. The differences are relatively small, but those differences represent the different gates in heaven. And the Ari claimed that his nusach Ari, is the 13th gate. Since most of us don't know our shevet, so nusach Ari works for everybody, and that's why he endorsed the Ari had nusach Ari. Of course, that's a big problem. What is nusach Ari? I mean, that itself is not at all an easy question. Chabad calls its siddur nusach Ari, and it is the nusach of the Alter Rebbe, who went through the Kisvei Ari and came to a decision that this is the Ari's nusach. But the truth is, not everybody agrees with that. In fact, all Eidot HaMizrach are davening a version that is based on Nusach Hari. So there are different versions of what is Nusach Hari. And the fact that, in a way, it's a little strange that Chabad is the only one that calls its Nusach Hari. The truth is, all Eidot HaMizrach is some attempt to reconstruct Nusach Hari. Okay, so I don't know if they took out a copyright on the words Nusach Hari. It's probably not copyrightable or whatever. But still, as I say, I'm not knocking Chabad. Their version of Nusach Hari is the Nusach of the Balatanya. So, the Balatanya is certainly entitled to paskin what is considered to be the authoritative Nusach Hari, but not everybody agrees. But be it as it may, the point is that this notion that each shevet had a different nusach is what the Kamarna Rebbe is saying about the Torah itself. That's a much bigger chiddush, actually. But it's a similar analogy to the nusach of Tefillah. By the way, people ask on the Ari, and they basically say that some people do know their tribe. If you're a Kohen or a Levi, you know your tribe. Your tribe is Shevet Levi. So, but the only problem is, you know your tribe, but you don't know which nusach is the one that fits your tribe, right? So there would still be an argument to make nusach Hari if you hold that that's the Shar HaKayla. Yeah.
Now, what's so difficult to say that not saying the word of Marna, or say that it's true that every single word is obviously that we have in Torah given at Sinai, and Hashem left it in the hands of man to safeguard it, and due to our limitations, we haven't been accurate to the 100% exactly.
Well, listen. If you're asking me, would that kill me? That would not kill me. But all I'm saying is, it clearly would not be acceptable according to the Rambam. The Rambam says that every single letter of the Torah, Hamatsuya biyadenu, although he doesn't say those words here, is mipi Hashem. So the Kamarna Rebbe is giving a teretz that would work according to the Rambam. Now, if you want to posit human error, that is possible. But once again, the problem with human error is slippery slope. Meaning to say, once I posit human error, then, maybe human error was they wrote Shabbos wrong. But on the other hand, that could be negated by the 99.9% correspondence. Meaning, in other words, if every single Torah in the world says the same thing about Shabbos and about Kashrus, it's not likely that human error is at 100% rate. In other words, to posit other deviations than those 8 would be assuming that everybody made that mistake. Right? And that's not probable. That is not probable. So Memela, so again, I feel it does not bother me b'etzem to assume that little errors were made here and there, because as long as we know that no mitzvah of the Torah was changed, no story of the Torah was changed, no halacha was changed, okay, transmissions, things happen. But as I say, the Rambam seems to reject that. And I guess the Rambam was afraid that once you open that door, then chas v'shalom, all sorts of claims could be made.
I wouldn't agree with the Gemara that we're not bucking vegetarians.
Well, that's the question. I said that's a kasha. That is a kasha in the Rambam. I'm not sure how the Rambam would be miyashiv. One answer, although it's a little dochak, I don't like to give an answer like this, is that maybe the Rambam is lapdafka. The Rambam, you have to understand, the Rambam, although the Rambam wrote his book for all generations, but the Rambam was also addressing specific problems that existed in his time. He was addressing the claims of Christianity. He was addressing the claims of Islam. He was addressing the Karaites. So when the Rambam says not a single letter was changed, no, it's possible. He doesn't mean not a single letter. He means that nothing important was changed. So, but in other words, but that means you're going to have to put in a lav dafka formulation. And, people don't like to say the Rambam is lav dafka because he was very, very precise. But again, it's possible. It's possible that there's a certain emphasis here that's maybe stronger than is really the case, because the Rambam really wants to negate any counter arguments that the Torah changed or the like. Yeah.
The
according to the Pshat that there are 13 Torahs and one for each tribe, we have Kohanim from Ashkenazim and Kohanim from Sephardim, so shouldn't they both have the same Torah?
Yep. So you're 100% correct. The problem is, of course, that even if the origin of the Torah scrolls are from different tribes, we no longer know which one belonged to which. So as a result, we can no longer say that this is the Kohanes and this is the Levis and this is the Reubens. So we're kind of stuck. And I guess we have to assume halachically that any Torah that comes from God is going to be kosher. So even if the wrong tribe uses it, it'll be kosher, and that's how we have to operate, simply because it's, again, the same way we're operating with davening. Maybe if you're not davening Nusach Hari, maybe your davening is Reuven's Nusach, and you're really from Yisachar. Okay, but you do, you do the best that you can, and the assumption is you're going to be Yotze. Yeah.
So, according to the explanation that there was only one Torah scroll left.
Yeah.
So, how did the Torah Shabbat Peh become preserved? I mean, there was no even Torah scrolls, then Kalachomer, there wouldn't be any Torah Shabbat Peh.
Yep, that's a very good question. That's why, again, I will admit to you that the pashtus of the psukim is this was the last Torah. And it could be Chazal, but Dafka did not want to learn the narrative that way, because then you would really have a problem of Torah Shabbat Peh disappearing. On the other hand, it's possible to say the following, even a king as evil as Menashe can only destroy physical things. So the concept would be, it may indeed have been the case that the Torah was preserved orally. In other words, Menashe succeeded, like that Pshat, in destroying everything physical. But there were tzaddikim that kept it in their minds, and they transmitted it. So I don't think it's impossible that the Torah Shabbat Peh could, and even the Torah Shabbat could have been preserved in an oral form, even if there was not a Sefer Torah. I remember years and years ago, I got a letter. I'll classify it with hate mail. But it was a legitimate criticism. Someone criticized me for something. They were actually in the right, but they wanted to draw a contrast between me and someone who indeed was a great, great gadol, Rav Simcha Wasserman. He was the son of Rav Chanan Wasserman. He actually taught in Ohr Somayach many years ago. And Rav Simcha Wasserman was a gadol b'Torah and also a great, great tzaddik as well. And she said about Rav Simcha Wasserman, she said a very beautiful thing. I've always remembered the way she said it. She said she would be confident that if the whole Torah would be lost from Am Yisrael, we would be able to reconstruct it by watching him over a few days. That he had so internalized the Torah that we would know everything just from him. So, using that analogy, I think that could have been the case, even if we lost all the Sifrei Torah. Yeah.
Is it possible that the 12 tribal Torahs didn't include Levi, but did include Menashe? So that it's based on the tribal inheritances. So a Levi in Hebron would be reading according to Yehuda. The Levi in Kedesh Naphtali would be reading according to Naphtali.
That's interesting. So Levi did not have an autonomous, but Levi itself would vary with the Shevet they were in. Yeah. Again, remember that the 48 cities, Levium had 48 cities. And the 48 cities were in all of the 12 tribes. The other 12 tribes, including Ephraim and Menashe, that's how you get 12 tribes. I'm just repeating your point. And so the suggestion is that not every Levi read the same Torah, depending on where you were. Yeah, it's indeed possible. Yeah. Okay. So how do we get onto this? I'm trying to remember. Oh, okay. Yeah. So we still didn't do. Okay. There are 3 Kofrim b'Torah. Somehow we can never get out of the first one. The person who denies. I'll just mention just quickly, and then we'll get into it next week in more Be'arichas. The other Cofare is Cofare in Torah Shabbat Peh. That's basically it. In other words, the first Cofare b'Torah is one who denies the divine origin of the written Torah, and the other ones will involve people who deny the divine origin of the oral Torah. And again, this is, from the Rambam's perspective, this is extremely important. Let me remind you, first of all, it's important generally. It's an issue that people still struggle with even today, where, I believe the Chumash, but I don't believe, rabbinic interpretation. And in the Rambam's lifetime, this was a tremendous issue, because the Karaites, I mean, today the Karaites are almost extinct. I mean, there are a few Karaites around. They have websites even. But Karaites in the time of the Rambam, and particularly in Egypt, where the Rambam lived, were a very, very, very powerful and numerous movement. And much of what the Rambam writes is specifically targeted to Karaite heresies. And of course, the outstanding feature of the Karaites was their denial of the authority of the oral law. And that's why the Rambam kind of brings that up whenever he can. And as a Cofare Bachelor, the Rambam will include not only a Cofare in Torah Shebechsav, but also a Cofare in Torah Shebal Peh. But we'll be marach on this next week. Okay, have a good Shabbos.